On the topic of things we've talked about on 605, I kind of want to get your opinion about something. We did a what if. We do these what if segments that the listeners really like. And the one I did the other day was, what if Hulk Hogan had not left the AWA, which, of course, is one of the biggest things to happen in wrestling history. And you can look at it from the AWA side. If Hulk Hogan doesn't leave, that means Gene Okerlund doesn't leave right then. That means David Schultz doesn't leave. Potentially Bobby Heenan doesn't leave. Potentially there's a whole bunch of things that go into play. But I tried to look at it from the other side. Vince McMahon had begun his national expansion in 1983. He had gone into Georgia Championship Wrestling towns, gone head-to-head with Ole. He got on cable television. He made his moves to try to buy the AWA and then, eventually would go to war with the AWA. Lots of different things happened. But we know that in 1984, he wasn't going to go forward with Bob Backlund. He did not want Bob Backlund as his main guy. We also know he couldn't rely on Jimmy Snuka, despite the fact he was the most popular guy in the company. So the question we asked on the show is, who would Vince McMahon have gone with to go national with 1984 forward? Who would have been his top star? And I would like to get your thoughts. I'm going to name a couple people, and if you have anyone else you could throw in there, let us know what you think. But we said...
Well, and first I'll say that's a very good question, and I'm drastically searching for someone that would have fit Vince McMahon's concept of wrestling at the time, so throw some names at me because, that was one of those things where how could you replace that one guy?
I'm going to throw three names at you. They're all different, and they all come with a little, carrot at the end of it. Sergeant Slaughter, who would turn babyface shortly after the beginning of 1984 and become, you could argue, either number 2 or number 3 to Hulk Hogan in terms of popularity. It was either Hogan Snuka Slaughter or Hogan Slaughter Snuka. So maybe you turn Slaughter babyface early and you still get that same storyline with an American beating the Sheik for the title. Or Kerry Von Erich. We know Vince was really hot after the Von Erichs. We know he attempted to have a merger of sorts with Fritz Von Erich. We know that when he went to war with everyone, the Von Erichs were in his magazine. They were mentioned on his television show. They were profiled on All American Wrestling in '83. He definitely and knowing what he likes in a wrestler, he certainly would have wanted Kerry Von Erich on top of everyone. And then the one I threw out there is someone who would have been, I think, great in the role, but I don't think he would have done it because of the travel. Austin Idol.
Ooh, very interesting. I'm going to take the Sarge. If they had turned Sarge babyface earlier and he had beaten the Sheik, the evil Iranian, for the title, that would have been a big wrestling angle. And Sarge was one of the best big men, one of the best workers in the business, and he could cut a promo. And obviously, the way that he did end up getting over, and then the only reason that he left working for Vince was because he got the G.I. Joe spot, and Vince wanted either a piece or all of that, and Sarge didn't want to give it to him. That's where they had their falling out. But it would have been a major wrestling angle and done great wrestling business, but it wouldn't have been Slaughtermania.
Right.
With Austin Idol, I'll jump to your pick first. He would have been a better promo than Hogan was at the time. He had that superhero look. Personally, and I can't see Austin Idol and Vince McMahon coexisting in the same place at the same time with Idol doing what Vince wanted him to do, and that concept of wrestling, it would not have lasted very long at all. Let's put it that way.
And to your previous point, there wouldn't have been a Slaughtermania. There was an Idolmania before there was Hoganmania.
And there once again, there could have been if you took Hulk Hogan's, I don't even want to say brain. If you took Hulk Hogan's personality and willingness to do things a certain way and put it in Austin Idol's body, it still could have worked. But those two personalities would not have coexisted. And out of the three that you mentioned, Kerry Von Erich, once again, he would have been the pick. He looked the part. He was certainly a better worker even then than Hogan was. He couldn't talk, but he might not have had to have with the McMahon's machine behind him. But once again, that we wouldn't be standing here probably right now. At least wrestling history would have been radically different because it would have probably been red hot for 2 or 3 years. And then something would have happened because of the things that happened with the boys. It would have probably happened quicker with that amount of money and that amount of travel and that amount of adulation on the line. And then if Vince had put all his eggs in that basket, he probably would have gone out of business.
And, the other interesting thing is, Cyndi Lauper would have still happened because that was through Lou Albano that happened. And that led to MTV, which was Richter versus Moolah. But Vince wouldn't have been as instantly successful going into the Midwest and specifically Minnesota if Vern still had Hogan, if Vern still had Gene Okerlund doing the promos and Bobby Heenan and Ventura and all the guys who defected. If there was a way to stop any of that, and certainly Hogan's the big one. Hogan going over there is really what changed the tide. If that wouldn't have happened, he wouldn't have been as successful in the Midwest.
And there were two other guys, obviously, that we can't ignore that could have been the biggest star in wrestling. And at one time, were Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair, but neither one of them would have worked in that spot simply because for Flair to have been Flair and to have been useful, Vince would have had to change the entire way that he thought about and presented wrestling. He wouldn't have been able to do sports entertainment. He wouldn't have been able to do the cartoon bullshit and the 8-minute match and it's a personal appearance in tights. He would have had to change up and down the card the way he did everything because Flair would have had to have gone out and get over like Flair does by being the best wrestler in the world and competing against the best. And I don't think Vince would have done that. And Dusty had more of a sports entertainment mindset, and he could, and it obviously would tailor his style to the WWF style, which he did later on in his career. And he could definitely have, of all of the people that we mentioned, he was by far the best promo. But Vince would have had to change the way that he looked at a guy. Would he have put Dusty Rhodes physically as the figurehead of his promotion, even though Dusty could talk him in the building? And then you would have had some blood, and you'd had some violence, and you'd have to have the Dream out there fiery, wanting revenge and cutting those promos, and people would have had to believed it. And so Vince would have had to change again to put Dusty in that spot, who, if Vince had changed and done Dusty's thing, Dusty could have probably fit very well in that spot and would have drawn. But you couldn't, there's no other person that I could think of that could have had the collaboration with Vince McMahon that Hogan did, and that Vince wouldn't have had to have changed his concept or presentation of what he thought wrestling was to change for that star.
Dusty's an interesting one because Dusty was, of all the guys we've named, the biggest national star. Yeah, he drew in Madison Square Garden. For Vince Sr. Do you think, knowing both of them, specifically knowing Dusty shortly after this time, do you think Dusty would have been able to, at that point in the 80s, coexist with a Vince McMahon who has an idea for the way he wants things presented and done?
Well, like I said, Vince would have had to have changed a lot just because Dusty wasn't going to look like Hulk Hogan physically. I think Dusty could have probably changed a little bit, but at the same time, I didn't know Dusty till '84. Dusty in the late 70s was so hot and so popular, and Dusty Mania was nuts, even though it wasn't called that. It's just the fact that he was the most popular guy in the business at one point. I don't know if Dusty and Dream the Ego, baby, were the biggest Texas. And I don't know if he would have felt like he was the one that needed to change at that point or whether the promoter needed to change, because why would you change something that had worked everywhere it went for Dusty? So it might have been one of those situations where Dusty and Vince, one or the other, said to him the same thing that Bill Watts said to Vince when he left in '95. There's only room for one Titan in Titan Sports. So really, if not for, I think, well, son of a bitch, Vince ought to be horsewhipped for firing Hulk over his sex tape revelations, because if it wasn't for Hulk Hogan, Vince McMahon might be still running the Cape Cod Coliseum up there, and Linda would be taking in washing. Who knows?